As I said, one lesson is that revitalisation is path dependent. There are very few, if any, recipes which can be applied everywhere. And one of the problems for those union movements which have looked at the success, for example, of the Service Employees Industrial Union in America and tried to reproduce its tactics in their own country, is that they find the environment is different and they don't succeed. All unions face challenges, but they're not identical challenges in the different countries. The economic context differs from country to country. There's been a lot of talk about varieties of capitalism. I mean, in a sense, capitalism, but it takes very different forms and very different faces. Legal frameworks differ very much from country to country. Government policies towards trade unions are very different. Employer attitudes, whether they attempt simply to exclude trade unions or to work with them, this differs, and this all shapes the terrain within which unions have to act. And so responses have to be appropriate to different national traditions and identities. But if this is the case, it's still true, it seems to me, that there are probably common principles for union revitalisation. And what I want to do in the time that remains is to talk about some of these. It's a question of strategy and not just tactics. The idea that there are simple devices, simple instruments that unions can pick up off the shelf, so to speak, and apply, and will solve all their problems. This is a mirage. There are no quick fixes, as we say in English. So if we take the notion of an organising model of trade unions, to apply this effectively, one has to rethink a lot of things. One has to rethink what are the aims and objectives of trade unions, what are unions for, what is the purpose. And so many trade unions have been in existence so long, this is a question which is not necessarily confronted. Are the objectives set maybe a century or more ago in many countries? What do they mean today in 2011? What are the constituencies? Who are unions for? How do they relate on the one hand to this secure, relatively secure workers? Very few people are secure these days, but some are more precarious than others. How do they relate to men and women, to native workers as against migrant workers, young workers as against older workers? And I come back to some of these issues of who is the core constituency of the trade union. What forms of action? Are trade unions primarily economic actors, or are they political actors, or do they combine the two? And if so, how? What is the relationship between negotiation on the one hand, contestation on the other? And what are the internal structures and responsibilities within a union? This is central for any discussion of applying an organising model. The relationship between centralisation and devolution of responsibilities. The debate in many countries, what should be the core principle of organisation? Should it be industrial, sectoral, or should it be territorial? And many unions in many countries have been debating this question. If workers are more precarious, more likely to shift from job to job, from industry to industry, is the old notion of an industrial basis of union organisation still as appropriate as it once was. What is the relationship between officials, activists and ordinary members? Does this have to be rethought as well? And all these questions are contentious, controversial. If, for example, one moves from an industrial to a territorial principle of organisation, this threatens those who are in powerful position within industrial unions. If you move resources from the sector to try to organise, for example, precarious workers in the localities, this takes away what certain people in positions of responsibility of enjoying and gives it to others. And this is problematic. And because effective revitalisation threatens entrenched interests, unions possess strong organisational inertia. And therefore, revitalising unions has to be a strategic question. What does this imply? First of all, strategy requires leadership. If unions have diminished resources, the resources have to be deployed much more smartly. Priorities have to be determined in new ways. For unions to act strategically implies, I think, three things. First of all, effective coordination between the different activities. And many unions have an internal division of labour in which different representatives or officials are doing different things in their own area of responsibility, and these don't necessarily interconnect to make a sensible, coherent whole. It requires long-term planning. Many union officials in many countries will say our job is firefighting. There's a fire here and we go and try to put it out, then there's one over there and we try to deal with that. We never have time to look beyond today's problems or at best tomorrow's problems. Very few unions can think a year ahead, let alone 5 years or 10 years ahead. And initiatives have to be well designed. Again, the idea that there is a simple, quick fix that you can pick off the shelf doesn't make sense. And all these things require central commitment and central leadership. But leadership is not enough. We have to reshape the relationship between theory and practice. The best strategies are useless if they're written out in documents at head office. They're meaningful only if they affect day-to-day trade union action on the ground. This obviously means that they have to be understood and they have to be accepted by local officials, by local representatives and by the rank and file more generally. And this, going back to what Reinhard was saying earlier, if trade unions are vehicles of emancipation, as they certainly should be, people can't be emancipated simply from above. Empowering the weak has to be a process of self-emancipation. The union can't be something above and external to the workers. The workers are, or certainly the workers should be, themselves the union. And so strategy also requires democratic influence and democratic involvement. strategic innovation has to go beyond the formal decision-making procedures. Again, Reinhardt said it's important that unions have rules, established constitutions, but sometimes trade unionists can make a fetish of the constitutional procedures. Meetings can be boring because they're going through all the routines. There has to be more than this, and one route to revitalisation is certainly rethinking how decision-making can be organised and managed within trade unions. Effective strategy is impossible without members' willingness to act. It's not simply a question of getting them to sign up and pay subscriptions. It's a question of ensuring that members are willing to do things within and for the union. And this then means there has to be a permanent and active internal dialogue. And it also means, I think, to use Gramsci's term, unions have to develop